Welcome back to the Joe Miller Show, KOAN Hot Talk, 1080 AM, 95.1 FM. This show is made possible by the McPherson Tax Defense Group, 1-800-BEAT-IRS, beatirs.com. That's B-E-A-T, IRS, serving Alaskans, Americans since 1978 with 2 generations of tax defense attorneys. We have a great extended segment for you today. John Zamarik is on again. He is a regular contributor to thestream.org. He also, of course, has been on this program before, received his BA from Yale University, MFA in screenwriting and fiction, and his PhD in English from Louisiana State University. He's also been a press secretary to pro-life Louisiana Governor Mike Foster, been active politically, of course, has written in a number of other outlets other than Stream, including the Weekly Standard, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, USA Today, Front Page Magazine, American Conservative, etc. John, welcome to the Joe Miller Show. Thank you for being willing to talk about that shooting that took place in Colorado several days ago.
Yes, thank you.
I guess I'll just start by talking a little bit about the comments that Ben Carson made, basically hitting the pro-life community. And, of course, a number of pro-life leaders have hit back pretty hard with his apparent blaming of the rhetoric for what happened in Colorado. And, of course, you know, the smoke hasn't even cleared from that yet. We don't even really know exactly what happened there. But tell us a little bit about your take on what happened there, whether or not pro-lifers are to blame, whether or not pro-lifers in general support violence against Planned Parenthood clinics.
Right. Well, I think Ben Carson was talking about radical fringe people who he might have run into, and he's not an experienced politician. And I think each of us in the pro-life movement has met one or two nuts who shoot their mouth off and, thank God, never do anything. And that may have been what was in his mind, because I see he's dialed back the comments, and he seems to have patched it up with some of the pro-life leaders that have been clashing with him. Breitbart.com. Austin Ruse has reported that there seems to be a truce in that particular battle. That he was not Ben Carson was not talking about people who call abortion what it is, which is killing of babies. He said in his statement, "This is the murder of 1 million babies a year," and I don't think it's incendiary to say that.
I think that was his Facebook post that he put up. Well, I appreciate that insight. We've got a little bit of time in this segment, so tell us a little bit factually about what happened with the shooting. Do you know anything about the investigations and conclusions at this point?
Well, the shooter appears to be someone who's severely mentally ill. He's been arrested for being a peeping Tom, leering through his neighbor's window at a woman. Then the woman's dog apparently confronted him, and he shot the dog. He was arrested for voyeurism and for animal cruelty. He was known by his neighbors to neglect his 2 pet dogs in the unheated, non-electrified shack he had in the woods of North Carolina. Okay, so this is someone, not only, he is not on Twitter reading pro-life manifestos, he doesn't have electricity. Okay, so let's start. This is the kind of psycho who lives down the road, who makes you decide to finally break down and buy yourself a handgun so you can protect your wife against the guy who walks around muttering to himself.
This whole thing started, right, outside of the Planned Parenthood clinic. I guess there's some debate, at least initially, as to whether or not that really was the ultimate target.
It's still not clear. He was shooting at passing cars from the news report I read. He didn't shoot any doctors. He didn't shoot any patients. Apparently, people around the clinic, some of them were hit, and I think that they might have been accompanying people to abortions, but, you know, It's hard to distinguish this from just a random shooting like the guy who shot up the premiere of Batman. Mr. Deere apparently used to knock on neighbors' doors and tell them that they needed to insulate the ceilings of their houses so that with metal, so the government could not hear their thoughts through the roofs of their homes. Neighbors called the police because he was bathing nude where their kids could see it. He recently was known to be on S&M websites and marijuana websites soliciting sex and drugs. He has spouted an apocalyptic Christian view at various points in the past. So it just sounds like the profile of someone who's probably a paranoid schizophrenic who will pick up whatever they're talking about in the media.
Well, when his picture first went out, I put up a Facebook post, and I said, this guy doesn't look exactly sane, does he? And it wasn't meant to necessarily label people by the way they look, but he just had that crazed look about him, kind of along the lines of what we saw with some of these other mass shooters. But, okay, so we aren't talking about a stereotypical pro-life guy. We're talking about somebody that has a whole host of issues with contradictory views, apparently. Again, we're getting all this, of course, second and third hand. Beyond the fact that the guy was engaged in these apparent contradictory type viewpoints, ideologies, perhaps motivated by some form of mental illness, why does the pro-life movement not embrace this type of action?
Right. Well, in the article I wrote at the Stream, thestream.org, I compare it to slavery, okay? In the 1840s and 50s, abolitionists were calling slavery what it was, a crime against humanity which violated the rights of millions of black Americans. The slave owners in the South claimed that this was incendiary, dangerous, divisive rhetoric which could lead to a black uprising, a slave revolt, which would result in the massacre of the whites across the South, as happened 30 years before in Haiti. So they used that as a pretext to silence abolitionist speech. They outlawed abolitionist newspapers. They arrested and imprisoned preachers who spoke about the biblical teaching, true teaching that slavery is wrong. And they basically managed to silence the free speech First Amendment rights of anti-slavery people all across the South. I think that's exactly what the abortion lobby wants to do now in the wake of this. When in fact, the only historical record we have is of one abolitionist, John Brown, with a small band of followers trying to start one slave revolt in the 1850s that went nowhere. He was hanged. His followers were hanged. The vast majority of abolitionists did not support a violent revolution against slavery. Does that mean they didn't think slavery was evil? No. It means that they wanted to go through the law, through the legal processes. They wanted an orderly, just society to expand the number of people to whom it accorded legal protection. They didn't want a civil war, terrorism, and vigilante violence. Likewise, those of us in the pro-life movement, we want our orderly, sane society to expand its legal protection to include the unborn. We want force to be used against abortion. We want it to be the police. We want to be able to call the cops on abortionists and have them arrested, given an attorney, read their rights, tried, and sentenced. That is our goal. Our goal is not people shooting it out in the streets. I've been active in the pro-life movement for more than 30 years. I've never met anyone in the most extreme fringes who supported igniting a civil war over the issue of abortion. And that's what it would be. It'd be now you'll hear pro-choicers say, well, you clearly don't believe your rhetoric. You don't believe that it's 1 million children being murdered a year, or else you'd be in favor of shooting doctors outside of clinics. To that, I would answer this. Imagine you lived in Pakistan, a country where honor killing is allowed, and you saw a man strangling his teenage daughter. Now, in America, where that sort of thing is illegal, you might call the cops, but you might even intervene directly. You might use violent force to stop that man because the police weren't there. But if you're in Pakistan, a country where honor killing is allowed by the police, if you try to stop that man, his family would turn on you, the whole village, the police might turn on you. Your only option to forcibly stop that murder would be to lead a gang of people with guns to fight against it. You'd be essentially declaring civil war. For us to use violent force to stop the murder of abortion in a country where it's legal, unfortunately, as in America, would be declaring war on the government. Now, to declare war on the government is quite a proposition. You have to. In my article, I argue you need to use the same criteria you would use when deciding whether to declare any other kind of war. There's a Christian teaching called just war teaching, which offers a long list of preconditions before you are justified in using violent force. And we could go through them if we have time. First, it has to be a gravely evil situation. Okay, that's abortion. That describes slavery too. Second, you have to have exhausted every conceivable nonviolent legal means of redress. Well, we haven't. One of the two political parties is strongly pro-life. We have strongly pro-life presidential candidates promising, we'll see if they deliver, to appoint pro-life justices to the court. There's a movement to amend the Constitution. There are legal outlets for our desire to protect the unborn.
Not only are there legal outlets, but in fact, we can see movement on the ground in the direction of the pro-life movement. I mean, there are attitudes that are changing amongst the youth. Generationally, it looks like the battle is being won. I mean, not completely. Any time that you have an innocent killed, obviously that's a major loss. But the fact is movement has been made, in part not just through legal mechanisms, but also, of course, through the efforts of the pro-life movement and education.
That's right. And then the next criterion for whether or not it's just to launch a war or a civil war or a revolution is there a likely chance of success? Well, I don't even want to speculate who would win a civil war in America because I don't want to talk about it as a realistic possibility. And then there's another bar that you have to jump over. The violence that you are trying to overcome has to be less than the violence you would cause by trying to overthrow it. Well, I think provoking a civil war in America over abortion would probably kill more people than it would save, even if it ended abortion, and there's no guarantee that it would. So what the liberals are trying to do is push us into a corner of saying either you want to shoot people in the street or you don't really believe that unborn babies have rights. It's called a false dilemma. It's a standard logical fallacy that you would learn to see through in Logic 101. But, of course, Logic 101 is no longer a required course, especially at Ivy League universities.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like too many people think rationally anymore. Well, you haven't, of course, I would assume that roundly the shooting has been condemned by pro-life groups throughout the country.
Yes, every pro-life group in the country has condemned this, and they know that it's really just a weapon for the left to take this horribly mentally ill man who killed these tragically innocent people, including a sheriff's deputy who was a pro-life Christian deacon who was there protecting the legal rights of the abortionists. See, that's how pro-lifers work. We work within the law. We protect the rights even of our enemies, even of the enemies of the unborn. That's the Christian way, but it's also the American way. It's what civilized people do in a civilized society. You know who's uncivilized? Planned Parenthood, who are acting like primitive cannibals, taking baby parts and selling them for profit.
Yeah, it's barbaric. Absolutely barbaric. Let me ask you this: as far as the political traction that's trying to be gained by some on the left, can you tell us? I mean, already we've heard some discussion about gun control legislation that needs to be introduced. I mean, in Colorado, of course, there was pushback when the last attempt was made. There were a couple of legislators that were unseated. But what are you hearing on the national front as far as using this event to make political gain on the left?
I think I think the main effort, what they're trying to do, is they want to frighten pro-life presidential candidates. They want to scare them into backing down from their pro-life stance so that the Republican Party will then be divided on the issue and tear itself apart over the social issues. I think Hillary Clinton is an extremely weak candidate and that all but one or two of the Republicans in the race could beat her in a general election. So they are hoping against hope to divide the Republican Party over the abortion issue so as to produce a weak, unenthusiastic nominee from the Republicans. I don't think it's working. I haven't seen the Republican candidates running and backing down because of this.
Yeah, I mean, there are a number of divides within the Republican Party, but the life issue is one of the most fundamental. And, of course, it's also the touchstone of voter apathy, of the decision of some within the Republican Party to abandon or not vote for the nominee. And so it is a divide point if you have kind of that approach of divide and conquer that can be capitalized on by the left. And I'm sure they'll try to do as much as they can with this. What do you see shaping up, though? I mean, right now, at least of those that are seeking the GOP nominee, they're all taking a pretty strong pro-life position, even those that haven't always been traditionally pro-life in the past, right?
That's right. I think they can see that this is a media manipulation. I mean, this is the same media who, when men in black outfits quoting the Quran, waving Quran in Paris, ran around killing Christians and Jews and yelling Allahu Akbar, that had nothing to do with Islam, okay? Nothing. But when a random psychopath shoots people near an abortion clinic, that indicts the Catholic Church, the Southern Baptist Convention, and the Republican Party. It's so transparently false. It's so obviously the product of dishonest, ideologically biased reporters. Remember that the last survey I saw, 90% of reporters identified as pro-choice, and 80% of them didn't even personally know anyone who was pro-life. They'd never even met them. So to them, we're like members of ISIS or Klingons from outer space. They can project onto us any crazy views they want because they've literally never talked to us. They've never met us, so they can demonize us as the other. There's a kind of xenophobia, a liberal xenophobia against the aliens in their midst who happen to be Christians and pro-lifers.
Yeah, that's very insightful. There is absolutely no doubt that there is some effort being made in that regard. When you look at how the divides are shaping up in this culture today, I mean, it just shocks me, for example, the interviews that are taking place with youth and how they don't know what the First Amendment is or what it means, and their willingness to effectively punish those that say things they don't like. And then, you hear about those that are on the left that don't even know pro-lifers, and so they don't have any type of affiliation. These are points of polarization that are growing more and more distinct in our culture. I mean, the ultimate end of this obviously can't be good unless there's some bridging that's done in the future.
Well,
How
that's
do you see
right.
this shaping up in the future?
Well, I certainly hope that we can overcome the polarization by getting a really solid president next year, because you can't marginalize a position that's held by the most powerful person in the world. Ronald Reagan did an enormous amount, not just in policy, but in terms of shifting the debate. I remember I campaigned for him at 11 years old in 1976, and he was dismissed as a fringe candidate. Well, once somebody's president, you can't call him fringe anymore. And suddenly conservative positions had to be taken seriously, and the left had to stop moving quite so far in a deranged direction, or else it would look like it was fringe. So I think this election might be pivotal for the future of our country.
I think you're right.
If the Democrats win, the polarization will get worse, but it's not because the conservatives are changing. It's because the left is going further and further and further, and there's no way to bridge the gap between them. But it's the left that's going in the radical direction. We're not changing at all.
We hear that in almost every election. This one is the one that counts, but I think it kind of being truer this time around. John Samarik, I appreciate you being with us on the Joe Miller Show, giving us some insights on this pro-life issue and also on the polarization of society. Stay with us. We'll be right back after these messages.